When I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, a wedding bouquet carefully wrapped in the passenger seat. The way my sister Vivian's eyes would darken every time I mentioned the wedding over the past weeks. The way her voice would catch on the word happiness, like it was something foreign she couldn't quite pronounce. 3 months I'd spent preserving roses from Abuela's garden, weaving them with irreplaceable lace from her wedding dress, creating something that connected 3 generations of Martinez women. I thought bringing it home to East LA was the right choice, sharing this precious piece of our family history. But as I carried my overnight bag and the carefully wrapped bouquet toward the faded yellow house on Cesar Chavez Avenue, I had no idea that in 5 days this symbol of love and heritage would become the target of 13 years of buried rage. My name is Ariel Martinez, and this is the story of how my sister destroyed the most precious thing I'd ever created because she believed I didn't deserve happiness. I just didn't know it yet. 6 months ago, I thought I had it all figured out. At 27, I'd finally landed the contract that would change everything. $25,000 from Walt Disney Animation Studios for a series of promotional graphics. It was the kind of breakthrough that freelance graphic designers dream about, the kind that meant I could finally stop choosing between groceries and rent. Jamie had proposed the night I got the Disney call. He'd been planning it for weeks, he told me later, but something about hearing me scream with joy over the phone made him realize he couldn't wait another day. James Thompson, my college sweetheart turned software engineer, down on one knee in our tiny apartment, with a ring that represented 3 months of his salary and all of his hope. That was 8 months ago. Now, as I looked at the house where I'd grown up, I wondered if coming home to prepare for the wedding had been a mistake. The house looked exactly the same as it had when I left for college 9 years ago. Same faded yellow paint, same wrought iron security bars on the windows, same Virgin Mary statue watching over the small front garden that my Abuela Rosa had planted before she died. The roses were still there, somehow thriving, despite years of drought and my mother's hit-or-miss watering schedule. We'd all attended St. Augustine Catholic Church just 3 blocks away since I could remember, and those Sunday mornings felt like a lifetime ago. Through the living room window, I could see the familiar blue glow of the television and the silhouette of my mother Carmen moving between the kitchen and the living room in the perpetual dance of a woman who cleaned other people's houses all day and then came home to clean her own. The front door opened before I could knock. Carmen Martinez at 52 looked older than her years, but her smile was the same one that had greeted me every day after school. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back in the same tight bun, and she wore the uniform of house cleaners everywhere, comfortable shoes, practical pants, and a company polo shirt that had seen better days. "Mija, you're here." She pulled me into a hug that smelled like pine sol and the lavender lotion she'd used for as long as I could remember. "How was the drive?" "Not bad, Mom. Monday afternoon traffic, you know." I followed her inside immediately, hit by the familiar cocktail of scents that defined my childhood, my mother's cooking industrial cleaning products and something else I couldn't quite identify, something medicinal. Vivian appeared in the kitchen doorway, and for a moment I felt like I was looking at a funhouse mirror version of myself. We'd always looked similar, my sister and I, but where I'd inherited our unknown father's lean build, Viv had gotten my mother's curves. Where my hair fell naturally straight, hers formed loose waves that she'd envied since we were children. But now, at 30, there was something fragile about her that hadn't been there before. Look who finally decided to grace us with her presence. Viv's voice carried that familiar edge of sarcasm that had sharpened over the years. "The princess returns to her castle. Viv, be nice." Carmen's voice held the weary tone of a woman who'd refereed too many fights between her daughters. "Ay, mija, don't listen to her. She just having hard time, see. I'm being nice, Mom. I'm just saying it's not every day we get a visit from Miss Successful Graphic Designer." Viv stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of something sharp on her breath. "Vodka, maybe? At 3 in the afternoon. And with a Disney contract, no less. Must be nice to have it all figured out." I clutched the wrapped bouquet a little tighter. This was exactly what I'd been afraid of. Viv had always been the golden child when we were young, the popular one, the one who made friends easily and seemed to glide through life without effort. But somewhere along the way, our roles had reversed, and the resentment had been building ever since. "I just want to share this with family," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's my wedding, Viv. I want you both there. Of course you do." She turned and walked back toward the kitchen, but not before I saw her reach for a small orange prescription bottle on the counter and shake a couple of pills into her palm. "Because God forbid Ariel Martinez doesn't get to be the center of attention." Carmen's face flushed with embarrassment. "She doesn't mean it, mija. She's just... It's been a hard year for her. I knew about the hard year. I knew about the job Viv had lost at the department store, about the boyfriend who'd moved out and taken half her furniture with him, about the car accident that had left her with back problems, and a prescription for painkillers that seemed to be lasting longer than the injury itself. What I didn't know was how to navigate the minefield of my sister's resentment while trying to plan the most important day of my life. The wedding was in 5 days. 5 days until I walked down the aisle at St. Augustine, the same church where Carmen had been married, where I'd been baptized, where we'd prayed together as a family, back when we still felt like one. I set the bouquet carefully on the dining room table, unwrapping it just enough to show my mother the delicate work I'd put into it. Her eyes filled with tears when she saw the preserved petals woven with what she recognized as pieces of Abuela's dress. "Ay, Dios mío." She touched the flowers with reverent fingers. "She would be so proud, mija. So proud." From the kitchen came the sound of a cabinet door slamming, followed by the clink of glass against glass. Viv was making herself another drink, and it wasn't even dinner time. "Maybe I should have stayed at a hotel," I said quietly. Carmen's hand found mine. "No, mija. This is your home. This is where you belong for your wedding preparation." She glanced toward the kitchen and lowered her voice. "She'll come around. She just needs time." But as I stood in the living room of my childhood home, surrounded by the same furniture that had witnessed countless fights between my sister and me, I wondered if time was something we were running out of. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see Viv's silhouette against the window glass in hand, staring out at something I couldn't see. The wedding was supposed to be a celebration, a joining of families, a new beginning. Instead, it felt like I was walking into a trap I'd set for myself by believing that blood meant more than behavior, that family meant more than toxicity. I looked down at my bouquet, 3 months of careful work, preserving something beautiful from Abuela's garden, and felt the first flutter of real fear. Not about the wedding itself, not about marrying Jamie, but about what might happen when you bring something precious into a house where not everyone wants to see you happy. Outside, the roses in Abuela's garden swayed in the evening breeze, beautiful and oblivious to the storm brewing just beyond their petals. Tuesday evening, Jamie arrived for dinner carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the nervous smile he always got when he was about to meet new people. It was endearing and heartbreaking at the same time because, despite dating for 6 years, this was only his 3rd visit to my family home. The first had been awkward, the second had been worse. I was hoping the 3rd time might actually be the charm. James Thompson was everything my family wasn't used to. Tall, blonde, soft-spoken, and from a middle-class family in Pasadena, where both parents were still married, and Sunday dinners happened around a dining room table instead of in front of the television. He'd grown up with piano lessons and summer camps, college funds, and family vacations. The kind of stability that seemed as foreign to the Martinez household as space travel. "Mom, you remember Jamie?" I made the introductions while Carmen fussed over the table settings she'd clearly spent the afternoon arranging and rearranging. Of course. "Welcome, mijo." Carmen beamed at him with the genuine warmth she reserved for people she considered family. Sit, dinner almost ready. See, Viv emerged from her bedroom wearing a dress I hadn't seen since high school and makeup that looked like she'd spent an hour applying it. The transformation was startling. For a moment, she looked like the sister I remembered from before everything went wrong, beautiful and confident and lit up from the inside. Well, if it isn't Prince Charming himself. She extended her hand to Jamie with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Ready to join the Martinez family circus?" Jamie shook her hand politely, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. He'd met Viv before, but never like this. Never when she was putting on a performance. "It's good to see you again, Vivian. Thanks for having me." "Oh, please, Call me Viv. We're going to be family soon, right? She settled into her chair across from him and reached for the wine bottle he'd brought. This looks expensive. Very fancy. I shot her a warning look, but she was already pouring herself a generous glass. The prescription bottle I'd noticed the day before was sitting on the counter, partially hidden behind the salt and pepper shakers. So, Jamie. Carmen bustled in with a steaming platter of enchiladas that made my mouth water. Ariel tells me your friend is going to be the best man. Someone from your neighborhood. Actually, he's originally from here, Marcus Rivera. We met playing basketball at the community center when I first moved to LA for work. Turns out he went to Roosevelt High, same as Viv and Ariel. The wine glass slipped from Viv's hand. Not enough to break, but enough to send red wine splashing across the white tablecloth Carmen had put out for the occasion. The stain spread like blood, and for a moment nobody moved. Shit. Sorry, Mom. Viv grabbed a napkin and started dabbing at the stain, but her hands were shaking. Just slippery fingers. It's okay, mija. It's okay. Carmen was already heading to the kitchen for paper towels, but her voice carried that particular strain that meant she was trying very hard not to lose her temper. Marcus Rivera Viv's voice was carefully casual as she continued to dab at the wine stain. I might remember him. What year did he graduate? 2010, I think. Same as you, right? Jamie was oblivious to the tension that had suddenly filled the room like smoke. He's a teacher now, coaches the varsity basketball team at Lincoln High. Really great guy. I watched my sister's face carefully and saw the moment when casual interest shifted into something else entirely, something that looked like pain mixed with panic. She excused herself to the bathroom, and I heard the medicine cabinet open and close. When she came back, her pupils were slightly dilated, and she moved with the careful precision of someone who was working very hard to appear normal. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of stilted conversation and forced smiles. Viv drank 3 more glasses of wine and picked at her food while asking Jamie increasingly personal questions about his job, his family, and his plans for the future. It felt like an interrogation disguised as small talk. So Marcus teaches at Lincoln High, she asked, cutting her enchilada into precise squares. Must be rewarding working with kids. Does he ever talk about his high school days? Sometimes, Jamie said, completely missing the undercurrent of desperation in her voice. He's pretty modest about it, but apparently he was quite the athlete back then. Viv's fork clinked against her plate a little too loudly. Oh yes, everyone remembers Marcus Rivera. Star athlete, homecoming king, all that. Every girl at Roosevelt had a crush on him at some point. Including you, I asked before I could stop myself. For a moment, her mask slipped and I saw something raw and wounded in her eyes. Ancient history, baby sister. Some of us learned a long time ago that wanting something doesn't mean you get to have it. After Jamie left, promising to see us all at the rehearsal dinner, I found Viv in the kitchen washing dishes with unusual intensity. You okay? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Fine. Why wouldn't I be fine? She scrubbed at a plate that was already clean. So your Prince Charming's best friend is Marcus Rivera. Small world. Viv. Don't. She turned to face me, and her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. I'm happy for you, Ariel. Really, it must be nice to have everything work out so perfectly. She dried her hands and headed toward her bedroom, but not before I saw her grab the prescription bottle from the counter. The pills rattled like a maraca as she walked away. I helped Carmen finish cleaning up in silence, both of us pretending we hadn't noticed the way Viv's hands had shaken every time Marcus's name came up, or the way she'd taken those pills like they were vitamins instead of the powerful painkillers I was pretty sure they actually were. That night, I lay in my childhood bed, listening to the sounds of the house settling around me. From Viv's room came the soft glow of her television and the occasional clink of glass against glass. At some point, I heard her moving around, opening and closing drawers. When I got up to use the bathroom, I saw her light was still on, and her door was cracked open. She was sitting on her bed with what looked like an old high school yearbook in her lap, staring at a page with the kind of intensity that made my stomach clench with worry. I didn't interrupt. I didn't ask questions. I went back to bed and tried to convince myself that whatever was happening with my sister and the mention of Marcus Rivera was none of my business. But as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just watched the first domino fall in a chain reaction I didn't understand and couldn't control. The wedding was in 4 days, and something told me that Marcus Rivera, being Jamie's best man, wasn't going to be the happy coincidence Jamie thought it was. In the distance, I could hear Viv's television still playing, and underneath it, the soft sound of pages turning. The incidents started small, so small that I almost missed them entirely. On Wednesday morning, I found my wedding dress hanging in the closet with a dark red stain splashed across the bodice like spilled wine. Carmen blamed our cousin Miguel, who was staying with us while helping with wedding preparations and looking for construction work. She spent 3 frantic hours with stain remover and prayers to every saint she could remember. Ay Dios mío, that boy is so clumsy, she muttered, scrubbing at the fabric. But don't worry, mija, it's coming out, see. The stain came out mostly, but it left a faint shadow that made my stomach twist every time I looked at it. Thursday morning brought the missing guest list. I'd left it organized on the kitchen table the night before, every address double-checked and ready for final confirmation calls. When I came down for coffee, it was gone. We found it eventually crumpled in the trash can under coffee grounds and banana peels. Miguel again, according to Carmen, though, when I asked him about it while he was trimming the hedge outside, he looked genuinely confused. Wedding list. No, prima, I didn't touch anything on the table. I've been outside since 6 this morning, ask your mama. Thursday afternoon brought the missing wedding rings. I'd left them in their velvet box on my dresser after showing them to Carmen the night before. When I went to put them in the safe deposit box at the bank, the box was empty. We turned the house upside down before finding them tucked behind the couch cushions in the living room as if they'd fallen and somehow migrated across 2 rooms on their own. By Thursday evening, I was starting to feel paranoid. These couldn't all be coincidences, could they? But Miguel had been nothing but helpful since he'd arrived on Monday doing yard work and running errands for Carmen. When I subtly asked about his whereabouts during each incident, he had solid alibis. Job interview downtown during the dress incident. Helping Mrs. Herrera next door fix her plumbing when the guest list disappeared. At the bank with me depositing his first paycheck when the rings went missing. That's when Sophia Chen arrived like a hurricane in designer jeans and practical sneakers, her arms full of wedding planning binders and her dark eyes already scanning the chaos of my mother's living room with the efficiency of someone who'd been my best friend since 3rd grade. Sophia had been my anchor through college, my maid of honor by default and by choice, and the kind of friend who showed up when you needed her most without being asked. She took one look at my frazzled state and immediately went into crisis management mode. "Okay, what's wrong?" she asked, setting down her planning materials and giving me the kind of look that meant she wasn't accepting anything less than the complete truth. I told her about the incidents while we sat at the kitchen table speaking in low voices so Carmen wouldn't hear us from the living room where she was folding laundry. Sophia listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each story. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, tapping her pen against her notepad in the rhythm that meant her brain was working overtime. "Where was Miguel during each of these incidents?" she asked finally. I went through the alibis I'd already confirmed. Monday job interview, Tuesday with the neighbor, Wednesday at the bank with me. Sophia nodded like this confirmed something she'd already suspected. "So he wasn't here for the rings. Who else has access to your room?" "Just Mom and—" I stopped. Viv. It was always Viv who was home when these things happened. Viv who'd been in and out of the kitchen when the guest list went missing. Viv who'd suggested I leave the rings on my dresser instead of in my purse. I felt sick even thinking about it. This was my sister. She might be struggling, she might be drinking too much and taking too many pills, but she wouldn't sabotage my wedding. Would she? As if summoned by my thoughts, Viv appeared in the kitchen doorway, swaying slightly and clutching a glass of what looked like orange juice but smelled like vodka. Well, if it isn't the maid of honor. She focused on Sophia with the careful attention of someone who was working hard to appear sober. Planning the perfect wedding for the perfect couple. "Hi, Viv." Sophia's voice was polite but cool. "We were just going over some last-minute details. I bet you were. Viv moved closer, and I could see that her pupils were dilated again. Those prescription pills combined with alcohol. My heart started racing. Tell me, Sophia, what's it like being friends with someone who gets everything she wants, Viv? I started, but she held up a hand to stop me. No, I'm genuinely curious. She focused on Sophia with laser intensity. Must be nice to watch your best friend land the dream job, the perfect guy, the fairy tale wedding. Some people have all the luck, right? Sophia stood up slowly, and I recognized the stance. She'd used it in college when drunk guys at parties got too aggressive, when professors tried to dismiss her ideas, when anyone underestimated the quiet girl with the sharp mind and the protective instincts of a lioness. Actually, Viv, I think Ariel's success has more to do with hard work than luck, but I'm sure you understand that having your own career and all. The barb hit home. Viv's face flushed and her grip tightened on her glass. My career. Right, because having a job is the only thing that matters, isn't it? Having money and success and a man who worships the ground you walk on. She was getting louder, and I could hear Carmen moving around in the next room, probably listening to every word and dying inside. Why does she get the perfect guy while I'm still alone? Viv's voice cracked on the last word, and suddenly she didn't look angry anymore. She looked broken. Why does everything good happen to her while I can't even keep a job at Target? The confession hung in the air like smoke. I wanted to go to her, to hug her, to tell her that her worth wasn't measured by her employment status or relationship status. But before I could move, she was already backing away, shaking her head. Forget it. Just forget I said anything. She turned and stumbled toward her bedroom, leaving behind the smell of vodka and desperation. Sophia and I sat in silence for several minutes, processing what had just happened. Finally, she spoke. Ariel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about the answer. She leaned forward, her voice gentle but serious. Is it possible that your sister is not handling your engagement as well as everyone hoped? I wanted to say no. I wanted to defend Viv, to explain away her behavior as stress and grief and the normal struggles of someone whose life hadn't turned out the way she'd planned. But as I sat there thinking about the incidents, the timing, the pattern that Sophia had spotted immediately, from Viv's bedroom came the sound of something heavy being moved, furniture scraping against the floor. Then silence. I think I said slowly that I need to be more careful about where I leave my wedding preparations. Sophia nodded and opened her planning binder. Then let's make sure there are no more accidents. She looked toward Viv's bedroom where a light was on and shadows moved behind the blinds. And maybe we should keep this conversation between us for now. I agreed, but my heart was racing, because if Viv was sabotaging my wedding preparations, if she was so consumed by jealousy and pain that she would hurt me to make herself feel better, then what else might she be capable of? Later that night, I lay awake listening to the sounds of the house around me. At some point, I heard Viv's bedroom door open and close, heard her footsteps in the hallway. When I got up to check, I saw her silhouetted against the kitchen window looking out into the darkness. From where she stood, she had a perfect view of the dining room table where my wedding bouquet sat in its place of honor, waiting for Saturday to arrive. She was studying it, memorizing it, and something about her posture made my skin crawl. I went back to bed without confronting her, but sleep was a long time coming. And when it finally did come, my dreams were full of shattered flowers and broken promises and the sound of my sister's voice asking why some people got everything while others got nothing at all. I found the prom dress on Thursday afternoon, hidden behind winter coats that hadn't been worn in years. I was looking for an extension cord to set up extra lighting for the wedding photos when my hand brushed against something wrapped in plastic. The fabric felt expensive, heavy with beading that clinked softly as I pulled it from the depths of Viv's closet. Even in the dim light, the dress was stunning. Deep emerald green that would have made Viv's eyes look like jewels with intricate beadwork that must have cost more than our family could afford. The kind of dress a 19-year-old girl would choose when she wanted to look like a princess, when she believed that the right outfit could change everything. The corsage was still pinned to the bodice. White roses and baby's breath, brown and brittle now, but carefully preserved like some kind of relic. Next to it, tucked in a small box on the closet shelf, was a matching boutonniere and something that made my stomach clench. Newspaper clippings. Dozens of them dating back over a decade, all featuring the same face. Marcus Rivera leads Roosevelt High to the regional championship. Local basketball star earns full ride to UCLA. The Roosevelt graduate returns home to teach and coach. Each article was carefully cut out and saved like pieces of a puzzle that told the story of a life Viv had been following from afar. I heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly shoved everything back where I'd found it, but the image of that dress burned in my mind. 13 years old and still hanging in plastic, like it was waiting for another chance. Like maybe someday there would be another prom, another opportunity to wear emerald green and hope for magic. That afternoon, while Carmen was at work and Viv was passed out on the couch after another liquid lunch, I found myself searching Roosevelt High School's website. They had digitized yearbooks going back decades, searchable by name and year. Marcus Rivera class of 2010. Senior class president basketball captain bound for UCLA on a full scholarship. In his senior photo, he was everything a 19-year-old girl would fall for. Tall, athletic, with the kind of genuine smile that suggested he was actually nice on top of being gorgeous. The kind of boy who would break your heart gently, which somehow made it worse. Vivian Martinez was listed 3 rows down, beautiful in that fragile way she'd always had, but there was something hopeful in her expression that I hadn't seen in years. She looked like someone who believed good things were coming, someone who thought the world was full of possibilities. I found the prom photos next buried in the social events section. Marcus had been crowned prom king, naturally standing next to Ashley Chen, who'd been crowned queen. They looked perfect together, like something out of a teen movie. In the background of one photo, I caught a glimpse of emerald green fabric that I was pretty sure was Viv's dress. The timeline was becoming clear. May 2010, prom night. Viv would have been 19, a year older than most of her classmates, because she'd been held back in elementary school when we'd moved around a lot during Carmen's struggles to find steady work. Old enough to think she knew what love felt like, young enough to believe that wanting something badly enough could make it real. I could picture it now. Viv works extra shifts at the grocery store to afford that dress. The family budget stretched impossibly thin, Carmen probably working double shifts to help pay for it. Viv practiced conversations in the mirror, planning exactly what she would say to Marcus when she finally found the courage. Viv believed that prom night would be the beginning of their love story, instead of the end of her faith in fairy tales. That evening, Viv emerged from her room, looking more put together than she had in days. She'd showered and changed into clean clothes, even put on makeup that didn't look like it had been applied with shaking hands. "Wedding plans going okay?" she asked, settling at the kitchen table where I was addressing thank you cards for gifts that hadn't arrived yet. "Really well. Everything's coming together." I waited for the sarcastic comment, the bitter observation about my luck, but it didn't come. Instead, she just nodded and watched me work in silence. "That's good. I'm happy for you, you know. Despite everything, I really am happy for you." The sincerity in her voice caught me off guard. For a moment, I saw past the anger and the pills and the drinking to the sister who used to braid my hair before school, who used to let me crawl into her bed during thunderstorms, who used to defend me against neighborhood bullies with the fierce protectiveness of someone who understood what it meant to be vulnerable. Viv. I started, then stopped. How could I ask about prom night? How could I acknowledge that I knew about Marcus without admitting I'd been snooping through her private pain? She must have seen something in my expression because her face shifted, became guarded again. "What?" "Nothing. I'm just glad you're feeling better today." She studied my face for a long moment, and I had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see right through me. That she knew I'd found the dress, the clippings, the evidence of a heartbreak that had been shaping her choices for over a decade. "You know," she said finally, her voice carefully casual, "it's funny how life works out. You spend years wanting something you can't have, and then you watch your little sister get everything you ever dreamed of without even trying." There was no anger in her words, which somehow made them worse. Just resignation, like she'd accepted that some people were meant to be happy and others were meant to watch from the sidelines. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd made different choices back in high school. If I'd been braver or prettier or just different somehow. She picked up one of my wedding invitations and traced the elegant script with her finger. But I guess some stories are meant to end before they really begin. The melancholy in her voice was devastating. This wasn't the bitter, angry Viv who'd been lashing out all week. This was the heartbroken 19-year-old who'd never quite recovered from learning that wanting someone didn't make them want you back. I wanted to reach across the table and hug her, to tell her that her worth wasn't determined by whether some boy had loved her in high school. But before I could find the words, she was already standing up, the moment of vulnerability closing like a door. "Anyway," she said, forcing brightness into her voice, "I should let you get back to your planning. Big day is coming up." She headed toward her room but paused in the doorway. "Ariel, be careful with that bouquet of yours. Some things are too precious to risk losing." There was something in her voice, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Not quite a threat, but not quite a concern either. Something that felt like a warning, though I couldn't figure out what she was warning me about. That night I lay in bed thinking about the girl in the emerald dress, the one who'd believed in fairy tales and happy endings. I thought about the woman she'd become medicating her disappointments with vodka and prescription pills. I thought about Marcus Rivera, probably completely unaware that his gentle rejection had set off a chain reaction that was still reverberating 13 years later. And I thought about my wedding bouquet sitting in its box in the dining room, representing everything Viv had wanted and never gotten. 3 months of work, generations of family history, symbols of love and hope and new beginnings. Outside my window I could hear Viv moving around in her room, and I wondered what she was planning. Because something in her expression tonight, something in the way she'd looked at my wedding invitation, told me she was planning something. The morning I finished the bouquet, Carmen cried. I found her sitting at the kitchen table at dawn on Friday, still in her work uniform from the night shift she'd picked up at Cedars-Sinai Hospital. She was holding the bouquet in her hands like it was made of spun glass, tears streaming down her face as she traced the delicate lace that had once been part of her mother's wedding dress. "Mija," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Abuela would be so proud." The bouquet had taken me 3 months to create, working every evening after my regular design projects were finished. It wasn't just flowers. It was history, memory, and hope woven together with threads that connected 3 generations of Martinez women. Each element told a story. The roses came from the garden Abuela Rosa had planted when she first arrived from Guadalajara in 1995, carrying nothing but 2 suitcases and a heart full of dreams for her family's future. She'd been 17, then pregnant with my Uncle Miguel, fleeing a family that wanted her to give up the baby and pretend it never happened. She'd started with a single bush, a peace rose that she'd somehow convinced to bloom in the harsh Los Angeles soil. Over 30 years, that garden had grown into something magical. Peace roses for hope, she'd told me when I was little, teaching me the names and meanings of each variety. Mr. Lincoln roses for strength, double delight for joy, garden party for celebration. Each bloom had a purpose, a prayer embedded in its petals. I'd preserved the flowers using techniques I'd learned from YouTube videos and perfected through trial and error. Silica gel to draw out moisture while maintaining color and shape. Delicate brushes to apply sealant that would protect the petals without destroying their natural beauty. Hours of patient work that had left my fingertips stained and my back aching, but had resulted in something that looked almost alive. The lace had been the hardest part. Abuela's wedding dress had been stored in Carmen's closet for decades, wrapped in tissue paper and mothballs. The dress itself was too delicate to wear, too damaged by time and storage, but the handmade lace trim had survived. Lace that Abuela had tatted herself during the months before her wedding, working by candlelight in her family's small house in Mexico. I'd carefully removed sections of the lace and woven them through the preserved flowers, creating a bouquet that connected my wedding day to hers. Every stitch carried the memory of a young woman preparing for marriage in a different country, a different time, but with the same hopes and dreams that I carried now. "Tell me about her," I said, settling into the chair beside Carmen. I'd heard pieces of Abuela's story over the years, but never the whole thing. Carmen's voice grew stronger as she talked, her tears shifting from grief to something deeper. "She married your grandfather even though his family didn't approve of her, even though they thought she was beneath him because her father was just a farmer. She came to this country with nothing, not speaking the language, not knowing anyone, but she was determined to build a better life for her children. I could hear the echo of Abuela's strength in Carmen's words. The garden was her sanctuary, mija. Every time life got hard, every time money was tight, or Abuela was drinking too much, or the kids were sick, she would go out to get those roses. She said they taught her patience. Beautiful things take time to grow. I thought about the hours I'd spent in that garden as a child, helping Abuela weed and water and prune. She'd spoken to the plants in Spanish, singing old songs from Guadalajara, and telling them stories about the family they were helping to feed. I'd thought it was silly then, but now I understood that she'd been teaching them the same lessons she was teaching me. That love required cultivation, that beauty demanded sacrifice, that strength came from surviving the seasons when nothing seemed to bloom. The bouquet was more than flowers and lace. It was the physical manifestation of every lesson Abuela had tried to teach me about what it meant to be a Martinez woman. Strong enough to survive whatever life threw at you, stubborn enough to bloom where you were planted, wise enough to put down roots that would nourish the generations that came after you. She wanted you to have her strength, mija, Carmen said, handing the bouquet back to me carefully. All of it. Every lesson, every prayer, every hope she ever had for this family. I held the bouquet against my chest, feeling the weight of 3 generations of dreams and sacrifices. Tomorrow I would carry it down the aisle of St. Augustine Catholic Church, where Carmen had been married and where I'd been baptized. It would be something borrowed, something old, and something infinitely precious. From the living room came the sound of Viv stirring on the couch where she'd passed out the night before after another evening of vodka and pills. I heard her moving around, probably looking for the bottle she'd hidden somewhere in the kitchen. When she appeared in the doorway, her hair messy and her eyes bloodshot, she stopped short at the sight of Carmen and me with the bouquet. Well, well. The family heirloom parade continues. Her voice was rough with sleep and whatever she'd been drinking. How touching. Vivian Carmen warned, but there was exhaustion in her voice rather than anger. Ay, mija, please not this morning. What I'm just admiring the sacred bouquet. Viv moved closer, swaying slightly. It really is beautiful. All those dead flowers preserved for eternity. Very symbolic. They're not dead, I said quietly. They're preserved. There's a difference. Is there? She reached out like she was going to touch one of the roses, then pulled her hand back at the last second. Because they look pretty dead to me, just like everything else that was supposed to be beautiful in this family. The bitterness in her voice was like acid eating away at the peaceful moment Carmen and I had shared. I wanted to defend the bouquet to explain what it meant, but I could see that Viv was looking for a fight, that she needed to destroy something beautiful because she couldn't create anything beautiful herself. Instead, I stood up carefully, cradling the bouquet against my chest. I'm going to put this somewhere safe. Good idea, Viv said, her voice following me as I headed toward the dining room. Wouldn't want anything to happen to it. Accidents do seem to happen around here a lot lately. I turned back to look at her, and for a moment our eyes met. There was something in her expression that I couldn't quite read. Pain, yes, but something else too. Something that looked almost like longing. She stepped closer to me, close enough that I could smell the alcohol on her breath and see the tremor in her hands. For just a second, she reached out and touched the edge of the lace with one finger, so gently it was almost reverent. Be careful with that, baby sister, she said softly, and for a moment her voice lost its edge. Some things are too precious to risk losing. I carried the bouquet to the dining room and placed it carefully in its special stand, surrounded by the other wedding preparations that had somehow survived the week's incidents. As I adjusted the preserved petals one last time, I couldn't shake the feeling that Viv's words had been less advice than warning. But a warning about what? And from whom? Outside, I could hear Carmen moving around the kitchen, probably making coffee and trying to pretend that the moment of tension hadn't happened. And somewhere behind me, I could feel Viv's presence watching me arrange her grandmother's flowers for the last time. Tomorrow was my wedding day. Tomorrow, this bouquet would fulfill its purpose, carrying the strength and love of 3 generations of Martinez women down the aisle to meet my future. But tonight, looking at Viv's reflection in the dining room window, I wondered if my precious bouquet would make it through one more night in this house. The bachelor and bachelorette parties were supposed to be simple affairs. Nothing wild, nothing expensive, just a chance to celebrate with friends before the chaos of the wedding weekend. Sophia had organized a wine tasting in downtown LA for Friday night low-key and budget-friendly. Jamie and Marcus were planning something equally modest at Marcus's apartment in Silver Lake. What nobody planned for was Viv showing up drunk and high at 10:32 hours into what had been a lovely, peaceful evening. The wine bar was called Vintage, a small, intimate place in the Arts District that attracted young professionals and couples on date nights. Sophia had reserved a corner table for our group, me, her two of my college friends who'd driven down from San Francisco, and my cousin Maria from Carmen's side of the family. We'd been laughing about embarrassing college stories and debating the merits of different wine regions when I saw a familiar figure stumbling through the front door. Viv was wearing the same black dress she'd worn to meet Jamie's parents last month, but now it was wrinkled and stained with what looked like food. Her makeup was smeared, and she was carrying a half-empty bottle of vodka in a brown paper bag. The hostess tried to stop her, explaining that outside alcohol wasn't permitted, but Viv pushed past with the aggressive confidence of someone who was too intoxicated to understand social cues. Well, if it isn't the bachelorette herself. She dropped into the empty chair at our table without being invited, swaying even while sitting down. Having fun celebrating the perfect life without the problematic family, Sophia's face went carefully neutral, which I recognized as her preparing for damage control. My college friends looked confused and uncomfortable. Maria, who'd grown up witnessing Viv's various meltdowns over the years, just looked tired. "Viv, what are you doing here?" I kept my voice low, hoping to avoid attracting more attention from the other patrons. "How did you even know where we were?" She pulled out her phone and waved it at me unsteadily. "Find My Friends app, baby sister. Technology is amazing these days. You can track anyone, anywhere, anytime." She took a long pull from her bottle, not bothering to hide it. Very convenient for keeping tabs on people. "You've been drinking," I said, stating the obvious. "A lot. Maybe we should call you a ride home." "Oh, I've been drinking. That's rich coming from someone sitting in a wine bar surrounded by alcohol." She looked around the table, focusing on each of my friends with the intense scrutiny of someone whose inhibitions had completely evaporated. "Let me guess. You're all here to toast perfect little Ariel and her perfect little fairy tale wedding." The slur in her words was getting worse, and I could see that she'd taken pills on top of whatever she'd been drinking. Her coordination was off. Her pupils dilated her speech pattern, that particular combination of loose and aggressive that meant she was beyond reasoning with. Sophia leaned forward slightly. "Viv, why don't you let me get you some water and maybe some food? I don't want water. I don't want food. What I want is for someone to explain to me why everything good in this world goes to people who don't even appreciate it." She was getting louder now, and I could see other tables starting to turn and stare. My college friend Jessica, who'd never met Viv before, tried to change the subject. "So Ariel was telling us about your Disney contract. That must be so exciting for the whole family." "Disney contract." "Right." Viv turned her attention back to me with laser focus. "Must be nice to have talent just fall into your lap like that. Must be nice to have everything work out exactly the way you want it to." "It didn't fall into my lap," I said quietly. "I worked really hard for that contract. Did you?" "Because from where I'm sitting it looks like you just got lucky. Lucky with your career, lucky with your perfect boyfriend, lucky with your perfect wedding and your perfect life." Her voice was getting shaky now, emotion mixing with the chemical fog of whatever she'd taken. "Some people get all the luck, while others watch from the sidelines for their entire lives. You don't understand what it's like," she continued, her voice breaking. "To watch your little sister get everything you ever wanted, to have to sit there tomorrow and watch some guy who destroyed your life 13 years ago celebrate her happiness while you remember what it felt like when he looked right through you like you were nothing." Maria reached across the table and touched Viv's hand gently. "Prima, maybe this isn't the time or place for this conversation." Viv jerked her hand away like she'd been burned. Don't touch me, and don't call me Prima like we're still little girls playing dress-up in Abuela's house. That was a long time ago, back when I still thought wanting something meant you might actually get it someday. She stood up abruptly, swaying so dangerously that I thought she might fall. The wine bar had gone quiet except for the soft jazz playing in the background, everyone pretending not to watch while obviously hanging on every word of the drama unfolding at our table. "You want to know what's really funny?" she said loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. "My little sister is getting married tomorrow to a guy whose best man is the same person who destroyed my life 13 years ago. Isn't that hilarious? Isn't that just the most perfect cosmic joke you've ever heard?" "Viv, please?" I started to stand, but she held up a hand to stop me. "No, let me finish." She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of makeup across her cheek. "I'm going to be there tomorrow. I'm going to sit in that church and watch you marry your perfect guy while his perfect best man gives a perfect speech about perfect love. And I'm going to smile and pretend I'm happy for you, because that's what good sisters are supposed to do." She grabbed her bottle and headed toward the door, moving with the careful concentration of someone who was trying very hard not to fall down. But she turned back before leaving her eyes focusing on me with sudden clarity. "You know what the really sick part is? I could have been happy for you. I wanted to be happy for you. But seeing him there tomorrow, watching him celebrate your happiness, well, I remember exactly how it felt when he crushed every dream I ever had about love." She shook her head. "That's the kind of cosmic joke that makes you wonder if God has a sense of humor or if he just really hates certain people." The door slammed behind her, leaving us sitting in stunned silence while the rest of the wine bar slowly returned to their conversations. Sophia paid the check without being asked while I sat there trying to process what had just happened, trying to understand how 13 years of pain could pour out of someone like that. On the drive home, my phone buzzed with a text from Viv. "Sorry about tonight. I'll behave tomorrow. Promise." But as I lay in bed, later replaying every word she'd said, I couldn't shake the feeling that her promise had sounded more like a threat. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice was whispering that bringing my precious handmade bouquet into a house with someone carrying that much pain and resentment might have been the biggest mistake of my life. The wedding was tomorrow. Marcus would be there, handsome and successful, and completely unaware of the role he'd played in breaking my sister's heart. And Viv would be there too, armed with 13 years of resentment and a prescription bottle full of pills that she was using like ammunition against her own emotional pain. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine how the day would unfold, but all I could see was the look on Viv's face when she'd talked about cosmic jokes and divine cruelty. It was the look of someone who'd reached the absolute end of her rope and was wondering what would happen if she finally let go completely. Saturday morning broke clear and bright, the kind of perfect Los Angeles day that makes you believe in fairy tales and happy endings. I woke up at 6 to the sound of birds singing in Abuela's garden and the distant hum of traffic on Cesar Chavez Avenue. My wedding day had finally arrived. For the first time in weeks, the house felt peaceful. Carmen was already up, moving quietly through the kitchen in her good dress, the navy blue one she saved for church and special occasions. The smell of coffee and fresh tortillas filled the air, along with something else I hadn't experienced in days: hope. Even more surprising was the sight of Viv sitting at the kitchen table, sober and clear-eyed, wearing a beautiful burgundy dress I'd never seen before. Her hair was styled, her makeup carefully applied, and for a moment she looked like the sister I remembered from before everything went wrong. "Good morning, bride." She smiled at me, and it seemed genuine. No sarcasm, no bitter edge, just warmth. "How are you feeling? Nervous?" I admitted, settling into the chair across from her. "But good nervous. That's exactly how you should feel." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Today is going to be perfect, Ariel. I can feel it." The change in her was so dramatic that I wondered if the previous night had been some kind of breaking point, a purging of all the poison that had been building up inside her. Maybe hitting rock bottom at the wine bar had given her the clarity she needed to find her way back to the surface. "I brought you something." She pulled a small wrapped package from beside her chair and placed it on the table between us. "A wedding day gift from your big sister." Inside the tissue paper was a photograph I'd never seen before. It showed all four of us, Abuela, Rosa, Carmen, Viv, and me standing in the garden when I was maybe 6 years old. Abuela was pointing to something among the roses, while Viv held my hand, and Carmen watched with that soft expression she got when she thought no one was looking. "I found it in Abuela's old photo albums," Viv said softly. "I thought you should have it. A reminder that no matter what happens, we're family. We're always going to be family." Tears pricked my eyes as I studied the photo. In it, Viv looked about 17, still young enough to believe the world was full of possibilities. She was looking at me with such protective love, like I was the most precious thing in her universe. "Thank you," I whispered. "This means everything to me." We spent the next hour like that, just talking and laughing like we used to when we were younger. Viv helped me eat breakfast, making sure I had enough protein to sustain me through the long day ahead. She asked thoughtful questions about the ceremony timeline and offered to help with any last-minute details. It was like having my real sister back, the one who'd existed before heartbreak and disappointment had hardened her into someone I barely recognized. At 9, we drove to St. Augustine Catholic Church in Boyle Heights, where I'd been baptized and confirmed, where Carmen and Abuelo had been married before I was born. The church was a beautiful old building with stone walls and stained glass windows that threw colored light across the wooden pews. Father Miguel Santos was waiting for us, a kind man in his 50s who'd known our family for years. "Mija," he said, embracing me warmly. "Today, God smiles on you and James. I can feel his blessing on this union." The bridal suite was a small room behind the altar where generations of St. Augustine brides had prepared for their weddings. Carmen and Viv helped me into my dress, a simple but elegant gown that I'd found at a sample sale in Beverly Hills. It wasn't the most expensive dress in the world, but it was perfect for me, and when I looked in the mirror, I felt like the bride I'd always dreamed of being. Sophia arrived at 10, with her arms full of flowers from the church's garden, white roses, and baby's breath that Father Miguel had offered as a backup in case anything happened to my handmade bouquet. She took one look at Viv, who was carefully arranging my veil, and raised an eyebrow in my direction. "Is everything okay?" she asked quietly. "Better than okay," I replied, and for the first time in weeks, I meant it. Jamie's mother, Eleanor Thompson, arrived shortly after with a small gift box. Inside was a delicate pearl bracelet that had belonged to her grandmother. "Something borrowed," she said, fastening it around my wrist, "and something that connects you to another family who loves you." The gesture brought fresh tears to my eyes. Eleanor had been nothing but welcoming from the moment Jamie brought me home to meet his parents. She'd never made me feel like I wasn't good enough for her son, never questioned whether someone from my background belonged in their solidly middle-class world. By 11:30, the church was filled with guests. Through the bridal suite window, I could see familiar faces from both sides of our families, friends from college and work neighbors from the old neighborhood who'd watched me grow up. It was a small wedding by some standards, maybe 75 people, but it represented everyone who mattered in our lives. Marcus arrived with the other groomsmen, looking handsome in his dark suit. I watched through the window as he greeted various guests, his manner warm and professional. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd found his place in the world, who was comfortable with himself and his choices. When he spoke to a group of Jamie's college friends, I could see why people gravitated toward him. There was something genuine about him, something that suggested he actually cared about the people around him. Viv saw him too, but instead of the pain or anger I'd expected, her expression remained calm, almost serene. "He looks good," she said matter-of-factly. "Happy. I'm glad for him." The generosity in her voice amazed me. After everything she'd been through, after all the years of carrying that heartbreak, she could look at Marcus and feel genuine happiness for his success. It was the first sign I'd seen that my sister might actually be healing. At noon, the processional music began. Carmen walked down the aisle first, escorted by my cousin Miguel, looking proud and beautiful, and only crying a little. Sophia followed, carrying her bouquet of church flowers with elegant grace. Then it was time for Viv. She paused at the door of the bridal suite and turned back to me. "I love you, baby sister. No matter what anyone says or thinks or does, I love you, and I want you to be happy." The emotion in her voice was overwhelming. "I love you too, Viv. Thank you for being here. Thank you for everything." She walked down the aisle with her head held high, and I watched through the window as she took her place in the front pew next to Carmen. She looked beautiful and dignified, every inch the supportive sister I'd always wanted her to be. Then it was my turn. Father Miguel came to escort me since Abuelo had been gone for so many years, and there was no one else to give me away. The church doors opened, and I saw Jamie waiting for me at the altar, looking like he might cry with happiness. Marcus stood beside him, the perfect best man ready to witness our vows and celebrate our love. I carried my handmade bouquet, carefully feeling the weight of 3 generations of Martinez women in my hands. Abuela Rosa's roses, preserved and beautiful, mixed with her wedding lace, and my own hopes for the future. It was everything I'd dreamed it would be, the perfect symbol of where I'd come from and where I was going. The ceremony was beautiful. Jamie and I exchanged vows that we'd written ourselves, promising to love and support each other through whatever life brought our way. Marcus gave a reading from Corinthians about love being patient and kind, his voice strong and clear. Father Miguel blessed our union with words that seemed to echo through the old stone walls. When Jamie kissed me at the end of the ceremony, the whole church erupted in applause and joy. I was married. I was happy. My family was together and whole, maybe for the first time in years. The reception was held at Mariachi Plaza in Boyle Heights, a historic site that had been the heart of the neighborhood's musical culture for decades. It wasn't fancy, but it was perfect for us, a place that honored our heritage while celebrating our future. During the cocktail hour, I watched Viv circulating among the guests, making conversation and laughing at appropriate moments. She seemed genuinely engaged, genuinely happy to be celebrating my marriage. When Marcus approached her to make polite conversation, she handled it with grace and maturity, chatting briefly about his work at Lincoln High School, before excusing herself to help Carmen with something. Everything was perfect. Around 7 o'clock, as the sun began to set behind the LA skyline, and the mariachi band played songs that reminded me of Abuela, I realized that I hadn't seen Viv in a while. I looked around for her burgundy dress, but couldn't spot her anywhere among the guests who were dancing and enjoying Carmen's homemade tamales. It was probably nothing. Maybe she'd just stepped outside for some air or gone to the restroom to touch up her makeup. But something about her absence made me uneasy, like the moment of calm before a storm hits when all the birds stop singing and the air becomes unnaturally still. I was Mrs. James Thompson now, surrounded by people who loved us and celebrating the beginning of our life together. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice was whispering that the day had been too perfect, too easy, that Viv's transformation had been too complete, too sudden to be entirely real. I pushed the thought away and focused on Jamie, who was spinning me around the dance floor, while the mariachi band played a song that Abuela used to sing while working in her garden. This was my wedding day, and I was going to enjoy every moment of it. But I couldn't quite shake the feeling that somewhere in the gathering darkness, something was waiting. I found Viv in the bridal suite at St. Augustine, sitting on the small sofa with an empty wine bottle at her feet and my wedding bouquet in her hands. It was 8 o'clock in the evening. The reception was in full swing back at Mariachi Plaza. Jamie was probably wondering where I'd disappeared to, and I should have been dancing with my new husband instead of tracking down my sister who'd vanished without explanation an hour earlier. But something had been nagging at me. Maybe it was the way she'd been too perfect all day, too gracious and supportive and understanding. Maybe it was the fact that I'd caught her staring at Marcus during the ceremony with an expression I couldn't quite read. Or maybe it was just instinct, the same sixth sense that had been warning me all week that something was building toward an explosion. I'd told Jamie I needed to go back to the church to get the marriage certificate we'd forgotten, but really I just needed to check on the bouquet. Carmen had suggested I leave it in the bridal suite during the reception to preserve it safely until I could take it home as a keepsake. 3 months of work, irreplaceable family lace roses from Abuela's garden. It was too precious to leave unattended for long. The church was dark except for the altar lights that Father Miguel always left burning. My footsteps echoed in the empty sanctuary as I made my way to the bridal suite, and for a moment I wondered if I was being paranoid. Maybe Viv really had just needed some air. Maybe she was back at the reception already laughing with our cousins and celebrating like the supportive sister she'd been all day. Then I opened the door to the bridal suite and saw her. She was holding my bouquet like it was a weapon, turning it over in her hands and examining every detail with the focused intensity of someone who was very drunk or very angry or both. The empty wine bottle at her feet explained the smell of alcohol that hit me as soon as I stepped into the room. Her carefully applied makeup was smeared, her burgundy dress was wrinkled, and her hands were shaking. "Viv," I said softly, not wanting to startle her. "What are you doing?" She looked up at me with eyes that were red-rimmed and unfocused, but there was something sharp and dangerous in her expression that made my skin crawl. "I'm admiring your perfect bouquet," she said, her words slurred but precise. 3 months of work, right? 3 months of careful planning and delicate craftsmanship, just like everything else in your perfect life. "You've been drinking," I said, stating the obvious while trying to keep my voice calm. "Why don't you give me the bouquet and we can go back to the reception together?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Give you the bouquet?" "Of course. Because everything belongs to Ariel, doesn't it? The job, the man, the happiness, the family heirlooms. Everything just falls into your lap while the rest of us watch from the sidelines." I could see that she'd taken pills on top of whatever she'd been drinking. Her coordination was off. Her pupils dilated her speech pattern, that particular combination of loose and vicious that I'd learned to fear over the past week. "Viv, please. It's my wedding day. Let's not do this now. Your wedding day." She stood up unsteadily, still clutching my bouquet. "Your perfect wedding day to your perfect husband, with his perfect best man standing right there at the altar, like some kind of cosmic joke designed specifically to torture me." I realized with growing horror that this had been planned. The sobriety this morning, the thoughtful gift, the gracious behavior at the ceremony. It had all been an act, a performance designed to get her close to the thing that mattered most to me. "You want to know what's funny?" She continued, swaying on her feet. "I've been thinking about this all day, about how appropriate it is that you're carrying dead flowers down the aisle. Because that's what this is, isn't it? Death disguised as beauty. The end disguised as a beginning. They're not dead," I said, stepping closer. "They're preserved. They're meant to last forever. Forever." She turned the bouquet over in her hands and I could see her grip tightening on the delicate stems. "Nothing lasts forever, baby sister. Especially not beautiful things. Especially not happiness." The change in her voice made my blood run cold. All the venom and bitterness she'd been suppressing for weeks was bubbling to the surface, and I could see that whatever control she'd been maintaining was finally slipping away. "Do you know what it's like?" she asked, her voice getting louder. "Do you know what it's like to watch your little sister get everything you ever wanted, to sit in that church today and watch Marcus Rivera stand at your altar while remembering exactly how it felt when he looked at me like I was nothing?" "Viv," I tried to interrupt, but she was beyond hearing me now. 13 years, she continued, tears streaming down her face. 13 years I've been carrying this around, and today I had to watch him celebrate your happiness while I remembered what it felt like to have him destroy mine. I had to listen to him give a reading about love while knowing that he's never looked at me like I was worth loving. She was gripping the bouquet so tightly now that I could hear the preserved stems beginning to crack under the pressure. Panic rose in my throat as I realized what was about to happen. "You think you deserve this happiness?" she said, her voice getting higher and more unstable. "You think you deserve to have everything work out perfectly while I have nothing? You think you deserve to carry Abuela's roses and wear her lace and have the fairy tale ending that was supposed to be mine?" The fury in her voice was terrifying, but underneath it, I could hear something else. Pain so deep and raw that it was like looking into an open wound. This wasn't just about Marcus or the wedding or even my success. This was about a lifetime of feeling second best, of watching opportunities pass her by, while I seemed to effortlessly achieve everything she'd ever wanted. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it completely. "I'm so sorry that you're hurting. I never wanted any of this to come at your expense." But my apology only seemed to make her angrier. "You're sorry." She raised the bouquet above her head like she was about to throw it. "You're sorry that you got the job and the man and the perfect life while I got nothing. You're sorry that I had to spend today pretending to be happy for you while dying inside. Viv, please don't." I reached toward her desperately, but she backed away. Those flowers mean everything to me. They're all I have left of Abuela. Exactly, she said, and suddenly her voice was deadly calm. They mean everything to you, just like Marcus meant everything to me. And do you know what happened to the things that meant everything to me? Before I could answer, before I could move or scream or do anything to stop her. She brought the bouquet down against the stone wall of the bridal suite with all the force she could muster. The sound was like bones breaking. 3 months of careful work, irreplaceable family lace roses that had been growing in Abuela's garden for 30 years, all destroyed in a single moment of violence. Petals scattered across the floor like confetti, but there was nothing celebratory about their destruction. The delicate stems snapped and fell apart, the preserved flowers crumbling into dust and fragments. The lace Abuela's wedding lace that had taken months to created by candlelight in a small house in Mexico tore apart like tissue paper. Pieces of it floated to the ground mixed with the broken flowers and the shattered remnants of everything I'd worked so hard to create. No, I screamed, dropping to my knees to try to salvage something, anything from the destruction. But it was too late. There was nothing left to save. I lunged toward Viv, not thinking clearly, just reacting to the devastation of something I could never replace. She pushed me hard, harder than I'd expected, and I stumbled backward into the small table where the church kept extra candles. The corner caught me just above my left temple, and I felt the sharp pain of impact followed by the warm trickle of blood. When I hit the floor, the cold tile pressed against my cheek, and I could see the destroyed bouquet scattered around me like the aftermath of a hurricane. Pieces of lace were still drifting down like snow, and somewhere in the wreckage, I could make out individual rose petals that had once been perfect and were now just debris. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard Viv's voice, shaky and uncertain now, like she was just realizing what she'd done. Ariel, Ariel. I didn't mean for you to get hurt, but it was too late for apologies, too late for anything except the truth of what had just happened. My sister had destroyed the most precious thing I owned on the most important day of my life, and no amount of regret could undo that betrayal. I touched my temple and my fingers came away bloody. Around me, the remnants of 3 generations of Martinez women's hopes and dreams lay scattered on the stone floor of a church where I'd just promised to love and honor my new husband. And somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of mariachi music drifting from the reception, where everyone was probably wondering where the bride had gone. Sophia found me first. I don't know how long I'd been sitting on the cold stone floor of the bridal suite, surrounded by the wreckage of my bouquet and the blood from my head wound. Time seemed to have stopped the moment Viv destroyed 3 months of work and 30 years of family history in a single act of violence. Viv was gone. After realizing what she'd done after seeing me bleeding on the floor, she panicked and ran. I'd heard her footsteps echoing through the empty church, then the slam of the heavy wooden doors, then nothing but silence and the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. Ariel Sophia's voice cut through the fog in my brain. Jesus Christ, what happened? She dropped to her knees beside me, her maid of honor dress pooling around her as she took in the scene. The destroyed bouquet scattered like debris from an explosion, the blood on my temple, the look of devastation that I knew was written all over my face. "Where's Viv?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. I couldn't speak, couldn't find words to explain what had just happened. Instead, I gestured weakly at the destruction around us, at the pieces of Abuela's lace that were still floating down like snow. Sophia pulled out her phone and immediately started taking pictures. Evidence, she said grimly, before anyone tries to clean this up or claim it was an accident. Then she was helping me to my feet, pressing a tissue to the cut on my temple, while guiding me to the small sofa where Viv had been sitting just minutes earlier. "We need to call the police," she said, her voice steady but furious. "This is assault, Ariel. She hurt you and destroyed your property. This isn't a family drama anymore." Before I could respond, the door burst open and Jamie rushed in, followed by Marcus and Father Miguel. Jamie's face went white when he saw the blood on my head and the destroyed bouquet on the floor. What the hell happened? He was beside me instantly, taking my face in his hands and examining the cut. "Who did this to you, my sister?" I whispered, and saying the words out loud made everything real in a way that felt like a physical blow. Marcus looked around the room, taking in the destruction with the same analytical eye that probably served him well as a teacher dealing with classroom crises. His expression was grim as he processed what he was seeing. "This was deliberate," he said quietly. "This wasn't an accident or a fit of rage. Someone planned this." Father Miguel crossed himself and began picking up pieces of the destroyed bouquet with reverent care, as if they were sacred relics instead of ruined flowers. "Ay Dios mío," he murmured. "Such beautiful work. Such history was destroyed." Mrs. Thompson appeared in the doorway, took one look at the scene, and immediately went into nurse mode. She'd worked in emergency rooms for 30 years before retiring, and her training kicked in automatically. "Let me see that cut," she said, gently, moving Jamie aside and examining my head wound with professional competence. "It's not deep enough for stitches, but it's going to need cleaning and bandaging." While she tended to my injury, Sophia was on the phone with 911, giving the dispatcher our location and a brief description of what had happened. Her voice was calm and professional, but I could see the fury in her eyes. She'd never liked Viv, had always thought my sister was jealous and unstable, and now she'd been proven right in the worst possible way. Carmen appeared in the doorway, still wearing her navy blue church dress, looking confused and frightened. She took in the scene with growing horror, her hand flying to her mouth when she saw the destroyed bouquet. "Dios mío," she whispered. "What happened here?" "Your daughter happened," Sophia said bluntly, not looking up from her phone. "Your older daughter destroyed Ariel's wedding bouquet and assaulted her." Carmen's face crumpled. No, that's not possible. Vivian wouldn't. She's been so good today, so happy for Ariel. She would, and she did," Marcus said quietly. "Mrs. Martinez, I think we need to accept that Vivian has some serious problems that go beyond what anyone realized." Miguel appeared behind Carmen, my cousin's face stricken as he took in the destruction. "Prima," he said softly, approaching me carefully. "Who would do such a thing? This is sacred. This bouquet. This is family." Carmen looked around the room at the evidence of her daughter's violence, at the blood on my face and the destroyed flowers on the floor, and for the first time in my memory, she couldn't find a way to excuse Viv's behavior. "She didn't mean it," Carmen said weakly, but even she didn't sound convinced. "She's been drinking, she's sick, she assaulted your other daughter," Sophia interrupted. "She destroyed irreplaceable family heirlooms. Being sick doesn't excuse this." Within 20 minutes, Detective Rosa Valdez arrived. She was a woman in her late 30s with intelligent dark eyes and the kind of calm competence that suggested she'd seen everything the job could throw at her. She introduced herself in both English and Spanish, clearly recognizing that this was a Latino family in crisis. "I need to hear what happened," she said, settling into a chair across from me. "Take your time, but I need all the details." I told her everything. About the incidents leading up to the wedding, about Viv's drinking and pill use, about her history with Marcus, and the pain she'd been carrying for 13 years. Detective Valdez listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. When I finished, she turned to the others. "Did anyone else witness the assault itself?" "No, but we have the aftermath," Sophia said, showing her the photos she'd taken. "And there's a pattern of harassment leading up to this." Carmen was crying quietly in the corner, finally understanding that her attempts to protect Viv had enabled something terrible. "I should have seen it," she kept saying. "I should have done something." Mrs. Martinez, Detective Valdez said gently, "Addiction and mental health issues are diseases. They're not your fault, but they're also not excuses for violence." Miguel stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. "Detective, this bouquet, it was made from our grandmother's garden. Flowers she grew for 30 years. Lace from her wedding dress. This is not just property. This is our historia, our family soul." "I understand," Detective Valdez said, making another note. "That will be important for the charges." The detective spent another hour documenting the scene and taking statements from everyone who'd been present. By the time she finished, it was nearly 10 o'clock, and our wedding reception had effectively ended. Guests had been told there was a family emergency and had gradually dispersed, taking their congratulations and well wishes with them. "We're going to need to find Vivian," Detective Valdez said, as she prepared to leave. "Do you have any idea where she might have gone? Carmen provided a list of places Viv might be: bars, she frequented friends, she might stay with the apartment of an ex-boyfriend, who sometimes let her crash on his couch when she was too drunk to go home. "I'll have patrol units check those locations," the detective said. "In the meantime, I'm going to recommend that you file for a restraining order first thing Monday morning. This kind of behavior often escalates." After everyone left, Jamie and I sat alone in our hotel room in downtown LA, still wearing our wedding clothes and trying to process what had happened. My beautiful day had been destroyed as thoroughly as my bouquet, and I couldn't stop replaying the look on Viv's face when she'd brought those flowers down against the stone wall. I kept thinking about what she said I told Jamie as he helped me out of my wedding dress, about how nothing lasts forever, especially not beautiful things. He was quiet for a long moment, carefully hanging up the dress that I'd never be able to look at again without remembering this night. "She was wrong," he said finally. "Beautiful things do last. Love lasts. Family lasts even when it's broken. And what we have together, what we promised each other today, that's going to last forever regardless of what anyone else does to try to destroy it." I wanted to believe him, but as I lay in bed that night, all I could think about was the sound of Abuela's lace tearing apart and the sight of 30 years of garden roses crumbling into dust. Some things once broken could never be repaired. Some wounds once inflicted would always leave scars. My sister had taken the most precious thing I owned and destroyed it in a moment of rage and pain. She'd turned my wedding day into a crime scene and my family into a collection of people who could no longer trust each other. But more than that, she'd shown me who she really was underneath all the excuses and explanations. Someone capable of calculated cruelty, someone who would hurt the people she claimed to love rather than deal with her own pain. As I drifted off to sleep, I made a decision that I knew would change everything. When Detective Valdez called with news of Viv's arrest, I would press charges. When the court offered plea deals and family pressure mounted for me to forgive and forget, I would stand firm. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive. Some wounds are too deliberate to heal. And some people, no matter how much you love them, are too dangerous to keep in your life. My sister had made her choice when she destroyed my bouquet. Now it was time for me to make mine. They found Viv at 3 a.m. at a dive bar in East Hollywood, passed out in a bathroom stall with an empty bottle of prescription pills scattered around her feet. Detective Valdez called me at the hotel to let me know she'd been taken to LA General Hospital for observation, then to county jail once the doctors cleared her. The charges were domestic violence, destruction of property, and assault with injury. Serious charges that could result in real jail time, especially given her history of substance abuse. But Sunday morning, as Jamie and I sat in our hotel room eating room service breakfast and trying to figure out what came next, I realized that my wedding day disaster had revealed something I'd never expected. A community of people who would fight for me when I couldn't fight for myself. Sophia had already called 3 times, offering everything from legal advice to a place to stay if I didn't want to go back to Carmen's house. Mrs. Thompson had stopped by with medical supplies and homemade soup, treating me like the daughter she'd never had. Father Miguel had sent a message through Carmen that the church would hold a special blessing for Jamie and me whenever we were ready. Most surprising of all was Marcus. At 10 a.m, there was a knock on our hotel room door, and I opened it to find him standing in the hallway with a small bouquet of white roses and an expression of genuine remorse. "I wanted to apologize," he said without preamble. "I had no idea about Vivian's feelings about what happened at prom. If I had known—" "It's not your fault," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "You can't be responsible for other people's reactions to things that happened 13 years ago. But I keep thinking about it," he continued, settling into the chair by the window, "about how she must have felt carrying that around all these years. I remember her from high school, but honestly, I barely knew her. We were in one class together, maybe 2. I had no idea she had those kinds of feelings." Jamie poured coffee for all of us while Marcus talked. It was surreal sitting in a hotel room in our pajamas, discussing my sister's mental breakdown with the man who'd unknowingly triggered it. "The thing is," Marcus said, looking directly at me, "I want to help fix this if I can. Not because I feel guilty, but because what happened yesterday was wrong. What she did to you was unforgivable, and if there's anything I can do to support you through the legal process, I want to do it." His offer was genuine, and I found myself understanding why Jamie valued his friendship so much. Marcus was the kind of person who stepped up when things got difficult, who took responsibility even when he didn't have to. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." By noon, we'd made the decision to extend our hotel stay for a few weeks, rather than going home to Carmen's house immediately. I wasn't ready to face the place where Viv had planned her attack, wasn't ready to see the dining room where I'd left my precious bouquet thinking it would be safe. Instead, we spent Sunday afternoon driving around Los Angeles, looking at apartments we might want to rent. It was time to establish our own home, our own space somewhere that wouldn't be contaminated by family drama and old resentments. We found a small 2-bedroom place in Silver Lake close to where Marcus lived, with hardwood floors and big windows, and a tiny balcony that got morning sun. It wasn't much, but it felt like possibility, like a fresh start. That evening, Carmen called to tell me that Viv had been formally charged and was being held on $50,000 bail. The public defender had advised her to plead guilty to lesser charges in exchange for mandatory treatment and community service. "She wants to see you," Carmen said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "She's asking to talk to you before the arraignment on Tuesday." "No," I said without hesitation. "I'm not ready for that. I may never be ready for that. Mija, she's your sister. She's sick, she needs help. Being sick doesn't excuse what she did, Mom. Being in pain doesn't give her the right to hurt other people." Carmen was quiet for a long moment. "You're right," she said finally. "I know you're right. I just don't know how to stop loving her even after this." "You don't have to stop loving her," I said gently, "but you do have to stop enabling her, and I have to protect myself and my marriage from someone who's proven she's willing to destroy the things I love most." Monday brought an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Thompson arrived at our hotel with a small wrapped package and a mischievous smile. "I know you can't replace what she destroyed," she said, settling onto the couch beside me. "But I thought maybe we could create something new." Inside the package was a small bouquet holder, silver and simple, designed to hold a few stems. Attached was a note, "For new beginnings and chosen family." "It's beautiful," I said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "There's more," she said, pulling out her phone. "I've been in touch with Sophia and some of the other women from the wedding. We want to plant a garden for you, at your new apartment on that little balcony. Roses grown from cuttings that I've been nurturing in my greenhouse herbs, that Father Miguel will bless flowers, that will be just yours." The thoughtfulness of it made me cry, but these were good tears, healing tears. My biological family might be broken beyond repair, but I was surrounded by people who had chosen to love me and support me and help me build something beautiful from the wreckage. Tuesday morning, I filed for a restraining order, while Viv pled guilty to misdemeanor charges and was sentenced to 6 months of supervised probation, mandatory substance abuse treatment, and 200 hours of community service. She was also ordered to pay restitution for the destroyed bouquet, though no amount of money could replace what she'd taken from me. I didn't attend the court hearing. I couldn't bear to see her, couldn't risk the possibility that she might try to apologize or explain, or somehow make me feel like I was wrong to protect myself from her toxicity. Instead, Jamie and I spent Tuesday apartment hunting and planning our future. We signed a lease on the Silver Lake place and started making lists of what we'd need to buy to turn it into a home. Simple things like dishes and curtains and a coffee table, but each purchase felt like an act of defiance against the chaos Viv had tried to create. That afternoon, Miguel stopped by the hotel with a box of items he'd rescued from the bridal suite before the cleaning crew arrived. A few pieces of lace that had escaped destruction, some scattered petals that could be pressed, and saved fragments of stems that still held the shape of Abuela's roses. "I thought you might want these," he said softly, "for remembering. Not the violence, but the love that made them." I held the salvaged pieces carefully, feeling the weight of what remained. It wasn't much, but it was something. A few threads connecting me to the grandmother who'd taught me that beautiful things were worth fighting for, even when the fight seemed impossible. That evening, as Jamie and I walked through our future neighborhood looking at coffee shops and bookstores and planning where we might have dinner on Friday nights, I realized that Viv had done something she'd never intended. By destroying my bouquet by attacking the symbols of my past, she'd forced me to create new symbols, new traditions, new ways of defining what family meant. I would never stop missing Abuela's roses or grieving the loss of her wedding lace. But I was beginning to understand that love isn't limited to the things we inherit. Sometimes the most beautiful gardens are the ones we plant ourselves with seeds given to us by people who choose to be part of our story. My sister had tried to destroy my happiness, but she'd only succeeded in showing me how many people were willing to fight to protect it. And maybe in the end, that was the most valuable wedding gift of all. 3 months after my wedding day, I was sitting in a courthouse in downtown LA, listening to a judge explain the terms of Viv's probation, while she stood before him in an orange jumpsuit that made her look smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. I hadn't planned to attend the hearing. Detective Valdez had told me it wasn't necessary since Viv had already pled guilty to the charges. But something had drawn me there that morning, maybe a need for closure, or maybe just curiosity about what my sister looked like after 3 months in county jail. She was thinner than she'd been at the wedding, and her hair had grown out enough to show dark roots underneath the blonde she'd been maintaining. Without makeup and expensive clothes, she looked like the girl I remembered from childhood, vulnerable and lost. The judge was explaining the conditions of her release: mandatory attendance at Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, weekly check-ins with a probation officer, completion of 200 hours of community service at a local food bank. She was also required to continue the substance abuse counseling she'd started in jail and to have no contact with me unless I specifically requested it. "Do you understand these conditions, Miss Martinez?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Viv replied, her voice barely audible. "And do you understand that any violation of these terms will result in immediate revocation of your probation and completion of your full sentence in county jail?" "Yes, Your Honor." Throughout the entire proceeding, she never looked in my direction. I was sitting in the back of the courtroom with Sophia, who'd insisted on coming with me for moral support, and Viv either didn't know I was there or was deliberately avoiding eye contact. Carmen was in the front row, dressed in her best church outfit and clutching a tissue. She'd aged 10 years in the 3 months since the wedding, the stress of having both daughters in crisis taking a visible toll. When the judge dismissed the court, she hurried forward to hug Viv, whispering what sounded like prayers in Spanish. I stood to leave, not wanting to create an awkward scene in the courthouse hallway, but Viv must have sensed my presence because she finally turned around. Our eyes met across the courtroom, and for a moment I saw a flash of the sister I used to know, the one who'd braided my hair and protected me from neighborhood bullies and taught me how to ride a bike. Then her expression hardened into something I didn't recognize, and she looked away. Outside the courthouse, Sophia and I walked to our cars in silence. The January afternoon was warm and bright, the kind of perfect LA weather that made everything seem possible, but I felt like I was carrying a weight I couldn't shake. "How do you feel?" Sophia asked as we reached her Honda Civic. "Empty," I said, and realized it was true. I'd expected to feel angry or sad or vindicated, but instead I just felt hollow. Like watching my sister accept the consequences of her actions had drained something essential out of me. "That's normal," Sophia said. "Grief doesn't follow a timeline, and grieving someone who's still alive is particularly complicated." She was right. I was mourning the sister I'd thought I had, the relationship I'd hoped we could rebuild, the family that would never be whole again. Viv was alive and would presumably get the help she needed, but the person who'd destroyed my wedding bouquet wasn't someone I recognized or trusted. That evening, Jamie and I had dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Silver Lake near the apartment we'd been living in for 2 months. It was a tiny place with checkered tablecloths and wine bottles for candles, the kind of neighborhood spot where the owner knew everyone's names and the pasta was made fresh daily. "How was court?" Jamie asked, twirling spaghetti around his fork with the careful concentration he used when he was trying not to say the wrong thing. "Final," I said. "She'll get help. She'll do her community service, and hopefully she'll figure out how to build a life that doesn't revolve around resenting mine." "And you? How are you with all of that?" I considered the question while I picked at my chicken parmigiana. The truth was complicated. Relief that there were consequences for what Viv had done. Sadness that it had come to this. Guilt that I felt more peace without her in my life than I had when she was part of it. "I'm okay," I said finally. "I think I'm going to be okay." After dinner, we walked through the neighborhood past coffee shops and vintage clothing stores and murals painted on the sides of buildings. Silver Lake wasn't East LA, wasn't the place where I'd grown up, but it was starting to feel like home in a way that Carmen's house never really had. Our apartment was small but sunny with hardwood floors and big windows that let in morning light. We'd furnished it slowly and carefully, choosing pieces that reflected who we were as a couple, rather than trying to recreate something from our childhoods. The balcony garden that Mrs. Thompson and the other women had helped me plant was thriving. White roses that would bloom in the spring, herbs that I used for cooking succulents that required minimal care but added beauty to the small space. It wasn't Abuela's garden, but it was mine. Carmen visited once a month now, our relationship slowly healing, but fundamentally changed. She'd started going to Al-Anon meetings after Viv's arrest, learning about enabling and codependency, and how love without boundaries could become destructive. It was painful work examining the ways she'd contributed to the family dysfunction, but it was also liberating. She came by that night with homemade tamales and stories from her new job at a preschool in Boyle Heights. At 53, she'd finally found work that fed her soul instead of just paying the bills, teaching 4-year-olds about colors and numbers and the names of flowers in both English and Spanish. The children love the garden stories, mija, she told me, as we sat on the balcony watching the afternoon light filter through the rose leaves. I tell them about Abuela Rosa and how she made things grow in hard soil, and they understand see. Some of them have grandmothers who did the same thing. We didn't talk about Viv much during these visits. Carmen would update me occasionally about her progress, the meetings she was attending, the job she'd found at a nonprofit organization that helped other women in recovery, but we'd learned to let our relationship exist independently of Viv's choices to love each other without using her as a bridge or a barrier. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, I heard Viv's voice. "Don't hang up," she said quickly before I could process what was happening. "Please, I just need to say something. You're not supposed to contact me," I said, though I didn't hang up immediately. "Your probation specifically prohibits—" "I know. I'm calling from the treatment center. They have a phone for family contact." She sounded different than she had in months, clearer somehow, like the fog of alcohol and pills had finally lifted. "I just wanted to apologize. Really apologize, not the drunk rambling from before." I sat down on the edge of my bed, phone pressed to my ear, not sure what to say. "I destroyed something that could never be replaced," she continued. "I hurt you on what should have been the happiest day of your life. I know sorry doesn't fix that, but I need you to know that I understand what I did was unforgivable." The sincerity in her voice was almost harder to bear than the anger had been. This was the sister I remembered, the one who'd been buried under years of pain and disappointment and self-medication. "I'm glad you're getting help," I said carefully. "I hope the treatment works for you." "It is working. 12 weeks clean, going to meetings every day. I'm seeing things clearly for the first time in years, and I don't like what I see." She paused, and I could hear other voices in the background suggesting she was calling from a common area. "I understand if you never want to see me again. I understand if you can't forgive me. But I needed you to know that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to become someone who deserves your forgiveness, even if I never actually get it." Before I could respond, the line went dead. She'd said what she needed to say, and hung up before I could react, before the conversation could become something more complicated than a simple apology. I sat there holding my phone for a long time, trying to process how I felt about hearing from her. Part of me was angry that she'd found a way to contact me despite the court order. Part of me was glad to hear that she was doing better. And part of me was sad that it had taken losing everything for her to find clarity. Jamie found me there 20 minutes later, still sitting on the bed with my phone in my hands. "Everything okay?" he asked, settling beside me. "Viv called," I said, "to apologize. How do you feel about that?" I thought about it, searching for honesty in my reaction. Relieved, I said finally. Not ready to forgive her, not ready to have her back in my life, but relieved that she's taking responsibility for what she did. That's progress, he said, and I realized he was right. 3 months ago, Viv had been consumed by bitterness and self-pity, blaming everyone else for her problems. Tonight, she'd called to acknowledge her mistakes and accept responsibility for the consequences. It didn't undo the damage she'd caused. It didn't repair the relationship between us or restore the family heirloom she'd destroyed. But it was a beginning, a foundation that maybe someday, if she continued to do the work of recovery, could support something resembling forgiveness. As I fell asleep that night, I thought about the garden on our balcony, how the roses Mrs. Thompson had given me were already showing new growth despite being transplanted from their original soil. Sometimes starting over wasn't about reclaiming what you'd lost. Sometimes it was about planting new seeds and trusting that with enough care and time, something beautiful could grow in unexpected places. 6 months later, I was kneeling on the balcony of our Silver Lake apartment, transplanting rose cuttings from Abuela's original garden into larger pots, when Jamie came home with news that would change everything. The Disney contract had led to something bigger. DreamWorks Animation wanted to hire me as a full-time concept artist with a salary that would let us buy a house with an actual backyard instead of just dreaming about one. It was the kind of opportunity that would have seemed impossible a year ago, back when I was struggling to make rent and wondering if freelance work would ever provide real security. But the best part wasn't the money or the prestige. It was the realization that Viv's attempt to destroy my happiness had actually freed me to build something better than what I'd lost. The roses I was planting weren't Abuela's original varieties, but they were descendants grown from cuttings that Mrs. Thompson had carefully nurtured in her greenhouse. Peace roses for hope, just like Abuela had taught me, but also new varieties that represented new possibilities. David Austin roses that bloomed in shades I'd never seen before, climbing roses that would eventually cover the trellis Jamie was building against our apartment wall. Carmen visited that afternoon with homemade tamales and stories from her preschool job. At 53, she'd finally found work that fed her soul, instead of just paying the bills teaching 4-year-olds about colors and numbers and the names of flowers in both English and Spanish. The children love the garden stories, mija, she told me, as we sat on the balcony watching the afternoon light filter through the rose leaves. I tell them about Abuela Rosa and how she made things grow in hard soil, and they understand see. Some of them have grandmothers who did the same thing. We didn't talk about Viv much during these visits. Carmen would update me occasionally about her progress, the meetings she was attending, the job she'd found at a non-profit organization that helped other women in recovery, the small apartment she'd moved into near downtown. But we'd learned to let our relationship exist independently of Viv's choices, to love each other without using her as a bridge or a barrier. Sophia stopped by that evening with wine and takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant, a tradition we'd maintained even as our lives had grown busier and more complicated. She'd been promoted to senior event planner at her company, partly because of how well she'd handled the crisis management aspects of my wedding disaster. "You know what's funny?" she said as we sat around our small dining table sharing pad thai and spring rolls. That night turned out to be the best networking opportunity of my career. Half the guests saw how I handled everything and ended up hiring me for their own events. It was typical Sophia finding the silver lining and turning tragedy into opportunity. But it also illustrated something I'd been thinking about a lot lately. The people who'd stepped up during my crisis, who'd helped me rebuild when everything fell apart, those were the relationships that had grown stronger and deeper. Marcus had become a genuine friend, rather than just Jamie's buddy who happened to be around. He'd never tried to excuse or explain Viv's behavior, never suggested that I should forgive her for his sake. Instead, he'd simply shown up consistently, including me and Jamie in his friend group, and treating our marriage like something worth celebrating and protecting. Mrs. Thompson had become the mother-in-law I'd always dreamed of having. She called me every Sunday, sent care packages when I was stressed about work deadlines, and had started a savings account for the grandchildren she hoped Jamie and I would give her someday. Her love was steady and unconditional, everything Viv had convinced herself she'd never receive. That night, as Jamie and I were getting ready for bed, I found myself thinking about the shadow box I'd created from the remnants of my destroyed bouquet. A few surviving pieces of abuela's lace, some preserved petals that had been scattered but not destroyed, photographs from the wedding ceremony before everything went wrong. It sat on our dresser now, not as a shrine to what I'd lost, but as a reminder of what I'd survived. I'd learned something important in the months since my wedding day. Happiness isn't about having a perfect life or a perfect family. It's about building something beautiful with the people who choose to show up for you, who celebrate your joy, instead of trying to diminish it. Viv had spent years convincing herself that my success came at her expense, that there was only so much happiness to go around, and I'd somehow taken more than my share. But the truth was exactly the opposite. The more love I gave and received, the more there was to share. The more I celebrated other people's victories, the more they celebrated mine. My sister might never understand that. She might spend the rest of her life fighting the demons that had driven her to destroy my wedding bouquet. But that was her journey to take her recovery to earn her peace to find. Mine was already growing in the garden on my balcony, in the home I'd built with Jamie, in the chosen family that had formed around us, in the aftermath of betrayal. It was growing in the work I loved and the future we were planning, and the simple daily choice to water the relationships that nourished me instead of the ones that drained me. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I could smell the roses blooming just outside our bedroom window. New flowers from old roots, beautiful things that had learned to thrive in different soil. They weren't the same as Abuela's original garden, but they carried the same DNA, the same capacity for beauty and resilience and growth. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. Sometimes the most beautiful gardens are the ones we plant ourselves with, help from people who understand that love isn't about what you inherit, but what you choose to cultivate. If you've ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal, if you've ever had to choose between toxic family and your own peace, if you've ever wondered whether it's possible to find happiness after someone you love tries to destroy it, I want you to know that it is. The garden always grows again, sometimes in places you never expected, planted by hands you never knew were there to help you. Share your story in the comments below. Where in the world are you watching from, and what seeds are you planting in your own garden of chosen family? Your voice matters here, and I'd love to hear how this story resonated with your own journey of healing and growth.